This is a case of murder and mystery and intrigue.
A brutal killing.
It was the body of a female wrapped in about 200 pounds of chain with a plastic bag over the head.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
This person may know something that they're trying to withhold, and they're scared to talk now.
She was tricked, threatened, coerced.
There's an urban legend there was about $500,000 in cash that went missing.
Maybe he got upset, lost his temper, went back over there and killed her.
The truth will be revealed.
Whoever went to these elaborate extremes to make this woman disappear wanted her gone and never to be seen again.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Five miles down the Mississippi River from New Orleans sits the quiet community of St. Bernard, Louisiana.
St. Bernard being so close to New Orleans, being so close proximity to the river and the traffic on the river, and just the multiculture attracts people here.
People are friendly and open. You know somebody who knows somebody who knows that person. It is a small community.
This familiarity can also create a false sense of security.
Some fishermen report they had found a body in one of their lines.
A female wrapped in some sort of chains. She had, I think, a cord or something wrapped around her neck.
The body was in an advanced state of decomposition. She was dressed only in a nightshirt. After an extensive check of medical records and some identification of her jewelry, they were able to positively identify her.
She's named as 61-year-old Dorothy Thompson.
She'd been missing for about 3 weeks prior to that.
But at the time, police weren't able to go forward with it. They could not continue their investigation.
Dorothy's murder remains a mystery for 18 years, until St. Bernard natives, Colonel John Doran and Lieutenant Mark Jackson decide to take it on.
I remember it so well because it was a big deal for St. Bernard. When I was about 15 years old, some friends of mine and I hustled a little job cutting grass at a pet cemetery. And I remember that lady that owned it. Dorothy was a bit of a recluse, kind of an eccentric type person. I don't think she was particularly in good health. But by all accounts, she was a generous person, a sweet person.
Dorothy's house sat way back off the highway, so you'd have to drive back kind of a secluded driveway to get to her house through some wooded area. They had pet tombstones across the whole front of the property. They had birds, cats, dogs, All sorts of animals. Any animal you could think of was buried in that pet cemetery. Back when I was young, the word around the community was that it was like a haunted house. People would go down there and say they seen ghosts and stuff like that around the property. It was a strange place, to say the least.
Almost everybody in St. Bernard Parish knew about the pet cemetery.
When we dug through the case file, we didn't have a lot left because when we reopened the case, it was a few years after Hurricane Katrina. St. Bernard was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. Before the storm, they had evidence. They had the chains that she was wrapped in. They had the cord that she had wrapped around her neck. All that was lost. So it was kind of starting from scratch.
One of the few salvageable documents is Dorothy's autopsy report.
The coroner ruled that it was a probable asphyxia or suffocation. Well, she either died from being strangled or from that plastic bag being placed over her head where she couldn't breathe. So it could have been a combination of the two.
Asphyxiation is a method to inflict your anger and frustration at this person while they're dying. That indicates that there's some personal involvement and that there was some anger by the alleged perpetrator.
To me, that was a premeditated, deliberate act. Whoever went to these elaborate extremes to make this woman disappear wanted her gone and never to be seen again.
As detectives unravel the past, they learn this isn't the first death police have investigated on this property.
We discovered that Dorothy's first husband died of a gunshot wound. The story was that it was a self-defense, that he was beating Dorothy and Dorothy shot him. And her second husband committed suicide on the back porch of the house.
The gruesome nature of these incidents leave police wondering if there's a connection.
When you have some history in the family of someone else that may have been murdered, you start thinking that maybe there's something going on in this family. Are there family issues? Are there control issues? Are there property issues?
When you think there's something suspicious here, you have to do an awful lot of research into learning your victim. You're often looking for the one person you can ask questions of that gives context or gives information that's relatively unbiased.
They begin to reconstruct Dorothy's timeline, aiming to identify the people she interacted with in her final 24 hours.
The first thing we did when we reopened it is establish the timeline. That's the very first thing I had to do to piece it back together. You have to find out when was the last time this person was seen or heard from, and who were they with.
They track down the woman who originally reported Dorothy missing.
Patricia Newman, she was in her early 30s. She did a lot of volunteer work in the community, particularly at hospitals, helping elderly people. She befriended Dorothy and started to take care of her.
Dorothy was in deep depression because of the passing of her mother. She was on several different kinds of medication.
They almost had sort of like a mother-daughter relationship. Patricia Newman had spoken to Dorothy around 9 p.m. on the 13th of April. She was to pick her up Sunday morning to run errands and maybe the pharmacy and something of that nature. When she tried to contact her that following morning at 9, she got no answer. She drove down there to check on Dorothy, thinking maybe she was sick or something else had happened. When she realized she wasn't there, I think she was immediately worried because Patricia knew that she did not have the wherewithal or the means to travel anywhere. And at that point, Patricia began to think that she may have met with foul play. She called the police. Police got there and searched the house with no signs of Dorothy being there. They found half a glass of wine. Not much else really to go on other than no Dorothy. She was missing, had vanished into thin air.
Between their conversation the previous evening and Patricia's 911 call, there's a 12-hour window for the murder.
You can start then making your timeline as to somewhere right after she last talked with Patricia, that starts the clock running.
They pressed Patricia for other details about Dorothy's final day.
It looks like she went to a bank to cash a check.
They discover she was not alone.
She was with a handyman.
We learned that Dorothy was hiring these transient types. She seemed to gravitate toward these people, or they gravitated toward her.
People would learn about the pet cemetery, learn about her, befriend her, and offer to do something for a few dollars.
The timeline shows that he may have been the last person that was with Dorothy Thompson before she disappeared.
Locating the last person to see the deceased alive is necessary because at that point you can establish things like where she was last seen, when she was last seen, what was going on in her world at the time.
A key detail about her transaction at the bank stands out.
She paid him $100.
In 1985, $100 would have been a lot of money. I don't think we made that for cutting grass the entire summer over there.
She was willing to pay him $100 to do handiwork. So it could give motive. It could give an indication that she has plenty of money.
Employing transients is a dangerous game because you have no idea what those people have done in their past. They may be convicted killers, and now they're working in your backyard and they're potentially casing your house out.
She had hired a handyman on the 12th. The day after she hires him, she disappears. So immediately, he became a person of interest.
Detectives are looking for an unknown handyman who received $100 from murder victim Dorothy Thompson within hours of her disappearance.
St. Bernard was very open, and it's an easy place for transients to come in, maybe do a little odd job here and there, make a few dollars.
It made the case very difficult because you had a lot of people that was on that property at different times, doing different things.
A discovery in her home gives them a potential lead.
They found a note in the house, and they came up with the name Kenny Pommier. They found out where he lived, and they were able to find him and brought him in for an interview. He was cooperative. He was forthcoming.
Kenny admits to being the man Dorothy paid $100.
He told him that he had answered an ad in the paper about cutting the grass and doing some repairs around that house. He said he had gone to the bank with her. He brought her to, I think, a grocery store, then brought her home around 4 p.m. And that was it. And that's the last time he saw her. And they knew that Patricia Newman had called Dorothy around 9 p.m. that night.
For Pommier to be the killer, he must have returned to the house after that phone call.
But it was kind of hard to track down where he was at the time that Dorothy disappeared.
Unable to confirm any alibi, they looked deeper into the robbery motive.
They never could really establish that there was anything of real value that she had there other than some jewelry. So to go to that extreme to dispose of this body, to me, was something more sinister. There's only a few reasons people murder, and it's, money, greed, revenge. To me, it's always motive. Motive, then means, then opportunity. But in this case, my first instinct was the motive had to be there. You kind of get that gut feeling about who you're dealing with, and they didn't necessarily rule him out, but I think they were satisfied with what he told them.
Police identify another individual who may have had opportunity in the time frame Dorothy was killed.
Elton Childress was another handyman that worked on Dorothy's property. I think they was in the hospital together, and she kind of befriended him, and Childress wound up working for her.
When you look at his criminal background, he had some violence there. Armed robbery, driving while intoxicated, and drunk in public, and things of that nature. He was a bit of a shady character, a bit of a mysterious kind of person.
People with criminal records, the police would definitely pursue those individuals more aggressively and more rapidly.
Because of the background he had, the way she was killed, somebody wanted her to disappear off the face of the earth. They didn't want her to be found. Somebody that had to have the means and wherewithal to do this.
Brought in for questioning, Childress claims he was nowhere near the house the night Dorothy went missing.
He really had no solid alibis.
So you want to investigate, how is he connected to her? Did he have any motives?
His explanation is tied to a lingering mystery that has surrounded the pet cemetery for decades.
Childress told the investigators that he was looking for hidden treasure on Dorothy's property.
He had heard the rumors from the local people down there that there was treasure buried. There's an urban legend, I guess. Apparently, Dorothy's mother had murdered her ex-husband's new wife in Kansas City. She fled here and basically found this spot in St. Bernard, which is about the farthest place you could go from Kansas City, and opened this pet cemetery and essentially hid out the rest of her life there and was never extradited back to Kansas City to stand charges.
Her ex-husband, a casino owner with alleged ties to the mafia, is rumored to have amassed a small fortune.
There was about $500,000 in cash that went missing, and then he mysteriously died. And that's the treasure that they talk about.
I remember over the years, you would hear stories of kids going in a pet cemetery at nighttime.
Back when we was young, we believed it. Everybody in the community believed it.
Rumors have a way of growing, and a rumor of buried treasure in a pet cemetery, you're going to attract a crowd of people who are going to want to take it.
It seemed like Childress spent most of his time searching for the treasure, digging up the pet graves and not doing much work at all.
His motive could have been that he just got frustrated, he got upset, that he couldn't find the hidden treasure anywhere, and went back over there and lost his temper and killed her.
It throws up a red flag, but then also you gotta wade through it and ask, why would Childress tell an investigator that he was looking for hidden treasure? So you gotta look at it both ways. Is he being honest, or did he just slip up and tell you something?
Remaining adamant, Childress goes on to accuse Dorothy's caregiver.
When Childress was interviewed, he said that Patricia Newman had motive to do this. That she befriended Dorothy because she was trying to take her property.
It's choice land down there. By 1985 standards, it was worth a lot of money, probably $250,000 to $500,000.
Detectives take a harder look at the woman who reported Dorothy missing.
It's common for suspects to try to establish themselves and get on the good side of an investigator and try to be forthcoming with plenty of information and showing that they have a big interest in this case.
They found out that Dorothy had had some children that lived out in California that she was estranged from since they were babies. Dorothy had bequeathed the power of attorney over to Patricia, and had left her in the will.
She was with her, she was close to her, she was one of the individuals who could have benefited if Miss Thompson passed away. Miss Newman may have had some motive for Miss Thompson's death.
Detectives consider if Dorothy Thompson's closest friend, Patricia Newman, killed her to inherit her property.
Patricia could have benefited a lot from Dorothy's passing. She befriended Dorothy. Dorothy had all the trust in her, and she knew a lot about Dorothy and what Dorothy owned at the time.
They revisit Patricia's story regarding Dorothy's disappearance.
With Patricia calling the sheriff's office and asking the sheriff's office to go check the well-being of Dorothy, Patricia possibly was trying to establish an alibi.
Her calling the police might very well be her way of trying to cast suspicion on somebody else and to clear herself.
This, in turn, raises questions about the crime scene.
The manner of the death was extremely violent, but when you see the house itself, it doesn't look like anything had happened. It's difficult to marry those two ideas.
I think the first theory you would assume when you get to the residence and she's not there is that she was maybe killed someplace else. Maybe she was kidnapped.
But it's a common thing for a perpetrator to stage a scene to make it seem like nothing happened.
So I think you have to consider all possibilities. You have to look at everything and everybody that was involved with this woman.
Patricia insists she didn't see or speak to Dorothy after their 9 p.m. call.
Her intentions were genuine toward Dorothy. She said she didn't even want the land. She was just trying to do the right thing for Dorothy Thompson.
The one thing left to consider is if Patricia was physically capable of the crime.
When the body was found in the river in black plastic, and when pounds and pounds of change wrapped around her, I don't know that Patricia would have had the ability to do that.
We're talking about being transported miles away from her residence and then dumped in the river. So Patricia wasn't completely ruled out.
She goes on to suggest yet another potential culprit.
Patricia Newman believed that the Nodiers were involved in Dorothy's disappearance and subsequent death. They were a couple named Brandon Nodier and Bonnie Nodier, who lived there and were also caretakers / groundskeeper.
Brandon was a handyman. He would cut the grass and stuff like that around the residence.
They run Nodier's name through the system.
Nodier had a violent past. He had several run-ins with the law. He had some aggravated offenses against him.
As Brandon lived on the property, he is automatically on Dorothy's timeline for the window of her disappearance.
You want to investigate, did he have any motives? Patricia Newman said that Mr. Nodier was constantly trying to get Miss Thompson to sign over the property to him.
Brandon Nodier wanted that land. He had told people he wanted that land. We learned at some point, Brandon decides that he wants Dorothy to sign a long-term lease for him to operate the property and live there. And apparently she agrees to that.
The elderly are prey to many criminals, and they are easily manipulated into signing away their assets or their fortunes.
For Nodier, the lease isn't enough.
From that point, Brandon Nodier decides that he wants to buy the land.
Maybe he was one of those people looking for the hidden treasures.
Brandon and Bonnie convince her to drive up to an attorney's office in New Orleans who represented Brandon Nodier and sign her property over to them in an act of sale. Supposedly, they were going to pay her $20,000, pay off an existing loan that was on the property, and give her use of the house, which means she could live there for the rest of her life. Patricia said Dorothy, by all accounts, was not lucid when this happened. She was coerced. At one point, Dorothy realizes that she had been duped because there was no $20,000 in her account. The loan was never paid off, and they were kicking her out of the property. And that's when Patricia Newman becomes involved to help her.
What happened was Patricia Newman found out about the property being signed over to Brandon, and she kind of convinced Dorothy to hire an attorney and bring this case to civil court.
So Dorothy immediately files a lawsuit against the Nodiers for fraud and illegal act of sale. It looks like it's a good case for Dorothy because she basically had been ripped off. I mean, she was swindled out of the land.
So they got a court date set up for a judge to hear the case. But a week prior to the case coming up, that's when Dorothy went missing.
So that turned the case on its head once that was found out.
Brandon Nodier has become the latest suspect in the murder of his employer, Dorothy Thompson.
When Brandon was interviewed, he said that Patricia Newman had motive to do this. He said she befriended Dorothy because she was trying to take her property. We didn't believe it.
The circumstantial details are also against him.
Proximity of the lawsuit to the murder is very suspicious, and it would lead investigators to potentially believe that the person who's involved in the lawsuit is involved in the murder.
The challenge for detectives is they have no physical evidence tying Brandon to Dorothy's disappearance.
When you have no evidence, it's a real challenge. You keep going back at what am I missing? Let's find another way. Think outside the box. Let's get from A to B where we have to get to. And oftentimes, it's frustrating.
We were in the process at that time of piecing back some of the information. When in 2009, we received an ominous call from a guy that says he has information about an old murder. So I start talking to this guy, and he says, you know, I know about an old murder, and I can help y'all solve it. Which murder? And he says, the Pet Cemetery murder.
So we asked him if we could meet with him, and he was very reluctant at first to meet with us.
Detectives convinced the caller, Juan Garcia, to talk.
I pick him up, and he's a tough guy from the street. I mean, he's not some shrinking violet. He was scared to death. He said he was a friend of Brandon Nodier. And Brandon admitted to him that he had killed her, and he was glad that he did it because she deserved it. He said he never told anyone because he was afraid of Brandon, and they were friends.
Though his story sounds convincing, the timing is suspicious.
We asked him in the interview, what's making you come forward now to talk about this case? And he said he had a premonition that this lady showed up at his bed while he was sleeping, and she had chains on. And it was Miss Thompson. And he said Miss Thompson had asked him to get her justice. And that's why he was there.
He said all sorts of crazy things. But in addition, he knew things about the case that really, some of it was reported in the paper, but not all of it. But it wasn't quite enough. You have to do the job, and you have to investigate every case, regardless of what it looks like on the surface. She was a helpless woman, really. Somebody has to speak for the dead. It's our duty. I felt like I was compelled to solve it. This was mine. So we had to do a lot more.
We came up with the idea that we was gonna go try to talk to Bonnie Nodier. We figured that she would be the one to talk to about this. Many years have gone by, and she may need to get this off her chest.
They speak to Bonnie while Brandon is away.
I told her we had a witness that came forward, and we need to talk to her about it. Said, talk to her attorney. They have nothing to say.
We wanted her to go back and tell him that we were close. We were coming for you, buddy. Our intentions were to force him to make a mistake. That was our only shot at it.
A few weeks go by, we get a call in the office from a female. Said her husband's in jail in St. Tammany Parish, and he wants to talk about a homicide. So myself and Colonel Dorian went over to St. Tammany and met with an individual in the jail.
James Tregler had a long criminal history of bombings and all sorts of crazy things. As it turns out, he was a close friend of Brandon, and he worked at the pet cemetery with Brandon. He hasn't seen Brandon in 25 years. He says Brandon pays him a visit at the jail after we talked to Brandon's wife. Brandon says the detectives are snooping around. So whatever happened between you and me a long time ago needs to stay between you and I.
Brandon's visit brings back memories Tregler has been trying to forget.
So he said back in 1985, he was working with Brandon at the pet cemetery. One night, Brandon calls him up out of the blue. He tells him, would you take a ride with me? I need your help with something. So he says they go down to the pet cemetery. And he tells James to stay in the truck. So James does. He said while he's out in the truck, Brandon goes inside of the house.
Then a few minutes go by, he hears Miss Thompson inside the house screaming.
He gets out of the truck and he looks in the door when he sees Brandon on top of Dorothy, choking her with her legs flailing. So he yells at Brandon, hey, what are you doing? Stop. Brandon gets up and he tells James to go back in the truck and wait. But during this time, Dorothy comes back to life. She's not dead. And she starts screaming, and Nodie jumps back on her and begins to choke her again. A little while later, Brandon comes out, says, look, you need to help me move the body.
Tregler explains Brandon's visit to the prison decades later was no social call.
Brandon gives him an ominous message. I know where your wife lives, and I know what kind of car she drives. And Brandon told Tregler, if you ever say anything, I'll kill you and your whole family.
James Tregler's jailhouse confession has police convinced Brandon Nodier is guilty of killing Dorothy Thompson.
Tregler maintained all along that he was an unwitting participant in this crime, that he had no idea what Brandon Nodier was going to do, that he only participated because he was scared to death of Brandon.
The word of a convicted criminal is always suspicious. It's always something that police have to check the hard facts and make sure that they validate what the person has said.
So you've got motive, you've got opportunity, you've got them both in spades, but you don't have enough to get a conviction.
They need to corroborate Tregler's story.
Tregler gave us some facts that never was published, some things that nobody else would have known about unless they was at that scene.
Particularly with the plastic, the chains. That information was ever publicized back in '85.
So everything that he said was verified. Well, the St. Bernard Parish District Attorney's Office put it in front of a grand jury, and they indicted Brandon on a second-degree murder charge. So the next time we seen Brandon, we had an arrest warrant for him.
The timeline shows how the events of Dorothy's last day culminated in her violent death.
Dorothy hires Kenneth Pommier to do some work. He brings her to the bank. She pays him, runs some errands. She goes back home. At about 9 p.m., she talks to Patricia Newman. That night, maybe around midnight or so, Nodier arrives at the house with James Tregler. Probably forces his way in. He may still have had a key.
Nodier was probably upset that he wasn't getting the property. He was probably upset that there were proceedings in court which may have prevented him from even trying to steal the property.
He goes in and he attacks Dorothy. A little while later, they wrapped her in the chains. They put her on the back of his pickup truck. And they drove to the Belle Chase ferry landing, which is several miles from the pet cemetery. And they simply threw her in the river.
On April 12, 2012, almost 27 years after the crime, Brandon Nodier awaits his fate.
At the end of the day, the district attorney made a plea bargain. He pled guilty to manslaughter, which is a lesser charge. But he got up in front of court, he admitted what he had done.
To the question of, are you pleading guilty because in fact you are guilty to the killing of Dorothy Thompson? He stood before the judge and said, "Yes, sir, Your Honor."
The plea agreement clearly identifies Nodier as being solely responsible.
Tregler had a lawyer, and with his testimony, he was given immunity, and he was never prosecuted.
Brandon Nodier is sentenced to 10 years in prison.
I don't think he had a guilty conscience. I don't think it weighed on Brandon at all. Because looking at him in court when he pled, he was still really cold. He didn't show no remorse, no nothing.
You know, I had mixed feelings because I thought, you know, we were happy that we were able to solve it. I was disappointed that he didn't get more time. I would have preferred to go to trial. He should be in prison for the rest of his life. But we did the best we could. You know, it's just unfortunate that it took so long to get to it, but I felt good about it.
One element of Dorothy's story remains a mystery.
The hidden treasure. No one's ever found anything in there.
People still search for that money down there. More than likely the money had been spent. That's just my guess. Or someone found it. Well, we'll never know now.
She was a loving mother. She loved her family.
A brutal killing.
The force that was applied to her throat was adequate to fracture her voice box.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
There had been an argument, and he knew that she was fixing to tell the whole world.
He could move around through the neighborhood and not be noticed. He was bragging about being the one that killed Charlotte.
The truth will be revealed.
I think the web that he had put up started to unravel. He knew this whole world was coming crashing down. He exploded.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Lynette, Alabama. A quiet, slow-moving community near the Georgia border.
Lynette is a small town. It's a rural type town, probably 6,000 people. Everybody knows everybody.
Little quirk of the thing is that because so many of the people who live in the Lynette area work in Georgia, the governments of the local area have adopted the Eastern time zone as their standard, whereas just 5 miles out of town, you're in the Central time zone. It's commonly referred to as slow time and fast time.
We don't have very many murders. Most of the time, you might have one a year. Some years you go with none. When the patrol arrived on scene, they were met by a female running out the door. She was screaming at them, "Help my mother, help my mother."
Inside the home, police find the body of 49-year-old Charlotte Waits, who her daughter Heather discovered a few minutes earlier.
She was a loving mother. She loved her family. She loved her work.
Miss Waits was a person that didn't meet a stranger. She knew everybody. She could speak to everybody.
She was generally loved in the community.
Lieutenant Richard Carter must quickly determine how Charlotte died.
You're not specifically looking for anything when you walk into a crime scene, but you're paying attention the moment you pull in the driveway.
The medic stated that it could have been a seizure because they saw foam in her mouth. She had a dislocated wrist. Our first impression was, could she have fallen down the stairs? But as we started looking around, there was other indicators that led us to believe that something else may have occurred. We noticed that there was some bloodstains on her blouse that didn't match what we were looking at on her body. There was no blood coming out of her mouth or out of her nose.
And then there were finger marks on her neck that appeared to have been from somebody choking her. It became obvious that the injuries that she had suffered from were not consistent with somebody who had just fallen downstairs. The cause of death was strangulation and blunt force trauma. The force that was applied to her throat was adequate to fracture her voice box.
They used so much force that when they slammed her to the floor, not only did it cause fractures to her skull, but it also caused her orbital socket to fracture.
Charlotte's husband, Barry Waits, arrives home and is confronted with the news that his wife has been murdered.
Barry Waits was our interim mayor, but he ran the National Guard Armory. You know, he was a man of prominence, a very well liked and an appreciated person. He was distraught. He began to have issues where he couldn't breathe. He was grabbing his chest, so we sat him down on the couch. I thought he was having a heart attack. We called the medics. They took him to the hospital. Turned out to be an anxiety attack. With the stress of the whole situation.
Miss Waits was very well thought of. And her murder demanded answers, especially in a small, tight-knit community.
She had no known enemies. She had no known vices. She had no known debts.
So the pressure was unreal.
To find Charlotte's killer, detectives must retrace the events of her final day. They begin by narrowing down the time of death.
We wanted to make that window as small as we could. That's why timelines are so important. not only with the victims, but any suspects that you develop that you need to eliminate. When we started looking at Charlotte's movement that day, she had gone to her school resource center position, arrived at a normal time. That afternoon, she was scheduled to go to a baby shower, so she left work early to go get her hair cut. We have confirmed that she had gotten that haircut. She was gonna go home and wash her hair, change clothes, and then come back and meet the ladies and then go to the baby shower. And when she never showed back up, they became concerned.
The lady from school tried to call her at about 1 o'clock on both the house phone and her cell phone, and she didn't answer.
And then her oldest daughter, Heather, she got home that afternoon and found her mother unresponsive in the floor. Immediately called 911.
Between the time Charlotte left the salon at noon and the unanswered phone call at 1 p.m., there's a narrow 1-hour window for the attack.
The daughter told us when she walked in that she found the door slightly ajar, which was unusual. We did a perimeter search. We noted that there was no forced entry in any doors. Windows were locked.
The thrust and focus of the law enforcement to begin with was that it was an intruder possibly who had come into the house and committed the crime. But there were prescription medications in her purse, and there was money in her purse, which was right there by her body. There were televisions, there were other items that would readily have been grabbed by some burglar, and none of that was taken.
And we did lift several fingerprints from the immediate area, somewhere in the stairwell, somewhere on the door frames at the front door and at the interior door frame. There was a pile of clothes laying in front of the washing machine, and we found 2 towels that had bloodstains on them. And right away, that was very suspicious to us.
Charlotte Waite's DNA was on the towel. Someone had taken those towels back to the laundry room and then come back by, essentially by her body, to get out of the house. I mean, that's a significant issue to me, that somebody had to know or care about her for them to bother to take the blood off of her. And secondly, to take the bloody towels to the laundry room, put them in the laundry basket. No, that doesn't happen. Strangers just don't do that.
Evidence from the crime scene indicates to police that Charlotte Waits was killed by someone she knew.
So at that time, we had to start with those that knew the family the closest. As in any homicide, you start inside and you work out.
Rumblings of a recent family fallout over an inheritance catches their attention.
Charlotte had an uncle named Ben Brown who had passed away a year to Charlotte's death.
They were divvying up among the people who were heirs to the estate, and there had been a cousin who filed a lawsuit saying that he should have been included and that he was due to get a share of the estate.
The cousin, Wayne Rice, had always been part of the family, but when Wayne started contesting the will and the inheritance, that caused some friction within the family, so at that point, they quit talking to each other. A lot of murders occur for financial reasons, greed, so we took it serious. A local attorney told us the night that Charlotte was killed that there was an appointment set up. Charlotte and her husband, Barry, were to meet with the attorney about it.
With Charlotte killed earlier in the day, that meeting never took place.
So Mr. Rice became a possible suspect.
You really find out somebody's true personality when you start fighting over money. I've seen people get shot over 12 inches of land. If you're due something, you're going to stand up for your rights and you're going to request what's yours. Emotions get high. I'm sure he felt very slighted.
Could he have done it? He was the first one that we needed to make sure didn't.
They bring Wayne Rice in for questioning about where he was the day of the murder.
Wayne Rice worked at an aluminum processing plant. He told us he was at work that day.
Wayne Rice was such a creature of habit. Wayne's colleague said that you could actually set your watch by what Wayne did during what part of the day and at what times.
They checked him out. His alibi was totally clean. There was no question about him being there. Mr. Rice could not have had any connection with Charlotte that morning.
Rice also says that his issue wasn't with Charlotte.
Charlotte was in favor of just giving in and giving him some of the money. So he had no real motive to have killed her. Probably she was his greatest ally in his quest for getting some of the money.
He told me that Charlotte was really bothered that that family was being torn apart over money and property. She didn't think anything was worth losing your family for.
The day after the attack, Barry Waits is released from the hospital.
Barry came to the police department, and we took that opportunity to interview him.
Barry had been at the National Guard Armory most of the morning, left there just shortly before 12.
He said that when he left the armory, he told some other colleagues of his that he was going to get a haircut. He went by the barbershop, but it was full, so he didn't stop.
Barry says he then went to purchase a battery for his daughter's cell phone.
Then he went back to work, and he stayed at work until he got the phone call from his daughter. We did speak to his supervisor, and he had received a fax from Barry. The fax had a date and a time on it, which told us what time that we know he was at the armory.
Barry's time seems to be fully accounted for.
He was a well-respected man of the community, and his whole reaction seemed natural. A distraught husband whose wife has just been found deceased.
Barry does provide the name of someone he thinks could be responsible.
Barry brings law enforcement's attention to the fact that his youngest daughter had a boyfriend named Dave.
Kara's boyfriend, Dave, was not liked by Barry or Charlotte. Dave was always into something alcohol-related. He was not someone that you'd want your daughter to date. He probably felt like they were looking at him as a second-class citizen. I think that Dave was upset by that. After Barry and Charlotte told Kara to quit seeing Dave, we did find out that they continued with their relationship behind their backs.
I've worked cases where a young lady actually talked an older boyfriend into killing her parents so they could be together. So, that was something that I did pay attention to.
We interviewed Dave. He was a little frustrated that we were even there questioning him. It got under his skin. He said he had no reason to kill her. He knew that they didn't like him. He's done some stupid things in his life, but he's never killed anybody. He told us that he had been at work that day, cutting grass, and hadn't even been in the area the whole day.
We confirmed with his landscaping company that Dave was at work during that time.
We also submitted his prints along with the prints that we collected at the scene. None of those prints come back to him. We comfortably felt that he had nothing to do with the case.
Despite this, police still believe Charlotte shared a connection with the person who attacked her.
Now, this neighborhood that Charlotte lived in, it was an upper middle class neighborhood. A lot of retired people lived there. When we're working these investigations, we tell everybody, no matter how small it is, tell us. We'll make a determination if it's important or if it's not. A lot of times, those small pieces of information they build up, no little piece of information is useless. We got a tip that a few doors down from Charlotte lived a young guy, Evan Johnston. He was a juvenile that we had dealt with for several years, breaking into houses, stealing, drugs. He could move around through the neighborhood and not be noticed.
Charlotte would have known Evan through the school system and through the neighborhood. He would have been very familiar to her.
Evan had told someone that he had planned to break into the Waits house, that he knew that there was some cash there. We felt that if Evan was the one that committed this crime, that Charlotte would have had to interrupt a burglary, and then he would have to kill her because she knew him, he knew her.
If you're breaking into a house to steal spare change and someone comes into the kitchen and you get caught, you could be looking at 10 years in jail. So there are many instances where a person, in order to avoid being caught for a minor crime, commit a much more serious crime.
Police look into Evan's whereabouts around the time of the murder.
We found out that he all of a sudden left town and went to Arkansas. And we thought, well, that's strange.
Anytime you have a suspect who does leave town shortly after a crime has been committed, you immediately think, this is our prime suspect. This is the guy who committed this crime.
Police have tracked down their latest suspect in the murder of Charlotte Waits, Evan Johnston.
We thought, this is it. This is the guy who did it. You know, he fits the mold. So we sent our investigator out to Arkansas to interview Evan.
They question him about his sudden departure from Alabama.
He tells them that this trip was something he planned to do. Evan told our investigator that on the day that Charlotte was killed, that he was over at a friend's house playing video games. He told us that the boy's mother had come in and saw him there. We went over there and interviewed his friend and his mother, and both of them confirmed that, yes, that did occur.
Another one of the factors that went into the consideration of whether Evan might have been the possible person who committed this crime was the fact that he was much smaller.
You had a pretty serious, heinous crime, and you had to go, would this young guy been able to have choked her out?
Well, as a matter of fact, Miss Charlotte probably could have beat his butt and kicked him out of the house.
They were able to rule him out as a suspect.
He just wasn't the one.
As Evan Johnston is eliminated, Lieutenant Carter receives a new lead.
We'd gotten a Crime Stopper tip The man by the name of Kenny had been at a party and was bragging about being the one that killed Charlotte Waits.
He had had brushes with the law in the past, had committed petty thefts and some burglaries and other crimes of that nature.
He always wanted to be a gang member. He was always looking for that association. And that was one of the things that was appealing to us when his name came up, was that he would be a good suspect. He never had a criminal history of any assaults, but we knew that he was headed down that road, that one day he might kill somebody.
Kenny's boast suggests he may well have taken his crimes to a new level.
If you get somebody who's bragged that they did a crime, that's often the solution to the whole puzzle, and you're finished.
The best criminals keep their mouths shut. They just go about their business, commit the crimes, and don't tell anybody about it. Because the best ones know that if you start talking, you're going to get caught.
Kenny could have broken in the house. He could have been the person that done this to Miss Waits.
We got excited. This is the break that we needed. So we went and found Kenny, interviewed him, and he denied having any knowledge of what it was I was talking about, said he'd never been to Charlotte's house.
Among other things, Kenny had an alibi that was probably one of the most unusual ones you'll find.
Kenny told us that he was with another guy named Larry.
They claimed to have been stealing cigarettes from another store when all this took place.
Then they would go to another part of town, sell those cigarettes for crack. They'd go to another location, smoke the crack, go back to the store, steal more cigarettes, and they just spent the day doing this. We went to and obtained the surveillance videos, but the video system that store had wasn't great, and there was multiple entrances to the stores, so we can never say he was actually there.
But with Kenny having named his friend Larry as part of his alibi, police have a second chance to determine his guilt.
At that point, we found out that Larry was in a prison in Georgia. So we made a trip to the prison. Larry told us the same thing, that they had been shoplifting cigarettes.
He confirmed Kenny's story.
An experienced police officer will give little to no weight to an inmate unless the information can be corroborated by other outside sources. And only then will an experienced police officer give it any weight.
With Kenny and Larry's story matching up, they look to the crime scene evidence for a definitive answer.
Kenny's fingerprints were not in the house. We didn't find anything to match him being there at all.
Police are also unable to find any personal connection between Kenny and Charlotte.
The only nexus we had to Kenny being at Miss Waits' house was the story from the party. And Kenny vehemently denies that conversation, and his exact words to me was, "Why in the hell would I kill Miss Charlotte?" The tipster did not come across credible at all. He was trying to get money and trying to throw Kenny under the bus for a crime that Kenny did not commit.
People often will brag about crimes that they didn't commit because it gives them greater status among their gangbanger friends in the community.
When we eliminate him from our suspect list, our disappointment level is bottomed out. You know, you're back to the frustration of, now we're back to square one. We're on fire to go get with these guys. And then when it turns out that they had nothing to do with it, where do we go?
Just as the case begins to stall, detectives receive information that sets it back into motion.
We received a call from a member of the Chamber of Commerce.
He told us that Barry had been scheduled to be at a ribbon-cutting affair in Lynette the day this all occurred, and he didn't make it.
This ribbon cutting had been scheduled several weeks in advance, so it's not something that he didn't know about.
Barry would not have missed an event of that nature without having had some real serious something going on that kept him from being able to be there.
That raised some flags.
So then we started picking away at what he said he did. When we were trying to verify his alibi at work, we went and we spoke to 2 or 3 people that were at the Armory that day. What we found out was that they had left prior to him, so we couldn't verify any of his coming or going times.
The one thing they do have is the fax he sent that afternoon.
We had a concrete time of when that fax was sent, and it was only sent by him because he was the only one at the Armory at the time.
But the critical issue of his timeline was that he told people that he'd left work and had gone to some other businesses around the town.
Talked to the barber. He said, no, he said, I never saw him come by. So then we went to the cell phone company, and what we found out there was that he didn't go when he said he did. It was several hours later.
And so there were considerable discrepancies in what he told the initial investigating officers and what the evidence itself bore out in terms of where he went and why he was there. And so it would have been nothing for him to go home and have an argument with his wife, kill her, and get back to the National Guard Army by the time he got back that afternoon. In fact, he'd have had time to spare. I don't think anybody initially would have even dreamed of thinking of him as the primary suspect.
Now he's left as the only one who we're unable to eliminate.
As the prime suspect in the brutal death of his wife, Charlotte, Mayor Barry Waits must now prove his innocence.
We offered Barry a polygraph exam. He was asked questions such as, did you kill your wife? Did you have anything to do with your wife's murder? And on each of those questions, he was deceptive. He failed the polygraph.
Believing Barry had both means and opportunity, it becomes a question of motive.
One of the things we have to do is look at what kind of financial issues does the family have. And in doing so, we discovered some things that were pretty concerning to us.
His family had entrusted him to manage some funds that his mother had, and as I recall, it was in excess of $100,000 that had just been put in his care for him to spend for her needs and for her benefit.
Mr. Waits had also been taking money from the Armory. Money is supposed to be allotted to take care of the day-to-day operations. He had started funneling into his own account.
But by the time of Charlotte's death, he had spent all of that money. We calculated what all he went through. It was $500,000 to $1 million that he had gone through in a period of about 2 years or less.
Some people are in very, very serious, dire financial straits. You'll have people who have been killed for literally a few dimes. You'll have other people who are killed for millions of dollars. Money's historically been one of the greatest motives for murder from the beginning of time.
Detectives consider what Barry was doing with the embezzled funds.
We could not find any significant gambling habits. We could not find any connections with women. We could not find certainly couldn't find any drug habits or anything of that nature that would have caused him to need the amount of money that he was spending. The only thing that we could consider that he might have been doing was day trading.
This implies he was using the money to cover his losses on the stock market.
Charlotte made a pretty decent salary herself, probably made at least as much as Barry made. So I doubt that she ever had an inkling that Barry had pulled all these financial shenanigans.
He had an image to uphold where people thought they were the perfect family, that they were financially well off, and neither of which is the case.
The web that Barry had put up started to unravel.
Their inquiry into Barry's finances leads police to a new discovery on Charlotte's timeline.
We found out through her colleagues at the school resource center that morning that she was killed while she was at work. She received a phone call from Barry. There was a heated conversation.
This is all 10 or so o'clock.
And when she hung up, she apologized to the lady and said there was an incident of some sort the night previous between her and her husband.
Detectives learned the couple had fought over the settlement, set to go to Charlotte's cousin, Wayne Rice.
The estate by that time had gotten down to, in cash, $100,000 or so left. And they were talking about giving Wayne Rice around $50,000 to settle his claims against the estate.
Charlotte wanted to settle the estate. She wanted to offer this settlement. Barry didn't want her to do that.
With Charlotte unaware how desperate Barry was for money, the argument became heated.
She came away very angry and told her coworker, said, "Look, I know you're fixing to get married, but I want to tell you those men will drive you crazy."
So it was an argument the night before, an argument that morning. We feel that the reason he went home was to continue that argument, to try and talk her out of making the settlement. And ultimately, we think that that's what led to the homicide.
The proverbial noose was tightening around Mr. Waits.
Despite the revelations, the case against Charlotte's husband remains circumstantial.
Circumstantial evidence can be extremely compelling, and it can often be enough to build a case. Whether it'll hold up during a trial is another matter. So it's not always good enough.
We never really received what I always called was that silver bullet. That would be the nail in the coffin.
By this point, suspicions surrounding the town's mayor is public knowledge.
You know how small communities are. Everybody knows everything about everybody else's business. So I think, quite frankly, that most of the community had concluded that he must be guilty by that time.
Even Mr. Waits had told various people that they probably have enough to indict me, but not enough to convict me.
Without sufficient evidence, Charlotte's murderer risks going unpunished.
Every detective has unsolved homicides. It is something that stays with them. It is something that bothers them, and it is something that they will not forget. It's unfinished business.
Almost a decade after the death of Charlotte Waits, her husband Barry continues to walk free despite widespread belief he's responsible.
When you're investigating a case and you know who your killer is, you know where he is, it's frustrating. And they've put so much effort and time into it. They're not just going to say, oh, we've hit another wall, we're dropping it. I think the more walls you hit, it's like anything else. You keep going back and what am I missing?
I told her daughters this from the very beginning, that I promised them. I said, your mother's case would never go in a file cabinet. It would always be right here, and we'd always work it. And even when they got mad with the police department and broke contact, it stayed right there.
Now adults, police return to the daughters, hoping they will cooperate.
In the beginning, they felt like we were after their dad, trying to frame their dad. Later on, as things progress and time goes by, they start seeing other things.
Lieutenant Carter slowly gets them to open up about Barry's activities since their mother's death.
Barry told his own daughters that they were suspects in the murder of their mother. And I think the purpose in him doing that was to literally to prevent them from talking to the police so that they couldn't give the police any information that would have been incriminating against him.
Told us the insurance company wouldn't pay Charlotte's life insurance to Barry because he was listed as a suspect. But he was able to convince the insurance to pay his daughters, give them the money. And then behind the scenes, Barry told them, if you'll give me the cash, I'll give you the land from this date. They give him $250,000 cash. Well, he never signed the property over. And that really was the opener to them. When he started stealing and scamming from them, stealing their inheritance, lying to them, then they realized, why should we not think that he's capable of doing this to our mother?
With Barry's own daughters prepared to testify against him, it gives the prosecution team the confidence they need.
Finally, I was convinced that it was a valid, circumstantial evidence murder case, and that it should go ahead and go forward to trial.
Let's roll the dice and let the jury handle it.
The state of Alabama charged Mr. Waits with her death, and it was my job to make sure that she got justice. This was a tough trial because, they had lost their mother. If I did my job correctly, they were going to lose their father.
In 2006, Barry Waits faces trial for the murder of his wife. Critical to the prosecution is the timeline of Charlotte's final day.
That morning, Charlotte went to her office at about 8 o'clock. She received a phone call from Barry at 10. She became angry during the conversation. At about 11 o'clock, she left there to go to the beauty shop and then went home at around 12 o'clock.
Charlotte washed her hair. She had her dress laid out that she was going to change into. She never got to that point. Barry left the armory.
He came home and they had the argument about the Ben Brown estate.
Fight started, and she was trying to get away from him. She probably told him something like, well, that's not your money, that's my money. I'm gonna do what I want to do.
He knew that his whole little world was coming crashing down. And he exploded.
His reaction was, now I gotta cover this up. So I think that's when he took her purse and poured it out.
I think he may have, in fact, had time there and then to regret what he had done. Otherwise, he would not have cleaned the blood from her face, for example. Took the towels to the laundry room, put them down on top of the laundry hamper.
He knew he had to get back to Cinemax just to say, hey, I was here. He didn't realize that we could fill in the holes prior to him getting there.
Even without any physical proof, it only takes the jury a few hours to find Barry guilty of murdering his wife, Charlotte. He's sentenced to 40 years in prison.
When he was convicted, one of the things that bolstered my belief that I had the right person, there was no showing of emotion. He basically said nothing.
I saw a family destroyed. The girls, they should have never had to go through what they went through. It was just a closure, you know. I didn't feel gratified, but I was glad it was over, and I was glad that it ended like it did.
Somewhere in the range of 5 years into his prison sentence that he died. It was natural causes.
Miss Waits was a good lady. She did not deserve what happened to her. Anytime a community loses a person like that, the entire community suffers. I feel it's important for the world to know that there are people in the justice system that continue to fight. Some of the good guys really do have badges, and they really are working for the right causes.